actually.
So let's start with Archegos. So Archegos is a family office.
Those days, family offices basically is, families with money.
Okay.
You set up your own investment office. What has happened of late is that a lot of these big super duper hedge fund owners.
Okay.
And here we're talking about the likes of George Soros, Bill Hwang himself from Tiger Fund. For the lack of a better term, to avoid regulation and the scrutiny that a hedge fund would have because they manage other people's funds, they basically cashed out and set up their own family office. So if he himself had bought Viacom shares, it would be registered. It would be public knowledge to say, I know so and so has bought so much Viacom shares.
Okay.
And people start saying, hey, this guy's making a move, or this guy's taking over, or blah blah blah.
Right. Okay.
So what they arranged with these bankers was through swap mechanisms. So the bank,
his name does not appear directly.
Only the bank's name appears.
Wow. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good day, everybody. Welcome back to Shape Discussion Series. Today, we are going to discuss a number of issues that has been going on in the financial market as well as the shipping industry. So, we are honored to have with us Mr. Iqbal, the Chief Treasurer at Warba Islamic Bank in Kuwait. Welcome, Mr. Iqbal. How are you?
Welcome, salam. I'm well, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So, Mr. Iqbal, I guess we've been observing two big trends happening in the market recently. One, the Evergreen ship stuck in the Suez Canal, and the recent Archegos debacle in the financial industry. Right. What's your thought on these issues?
That's a very interesting point. Actually, the two are uncannily parallel in my point of view.
Okay.
And let's start with the whole drama the world witnessed last week when this huge ship, which actually is almost as tall as the Petronas Twin Towers.
Wow.
You put the Petronas Twin Towers on its side, this ship is almost as tall as that, almost as long as the Petronas Twin Towers are tall, got stuck in the Suez Canal and blocked, trillions worth of shipping. And there were a lot of jokes, funny things going around, whatnot, and all that about what cost it and so on and so forth. But I think if we draw parallels with how the financial system has developed, when we look at the statistics, it dawns upon you that the growth of the shipping industry has far outstripped the capacity of the canal. So increasingly, the canal was channeling through ships pretty much beyond its limits.
Its
limits. And all it took was actually it was just waiting to happen for an accident like this to block the whole thing. And it's interesting if we look at between 1956 when the canal first opened up to current, the capacity of the canal has grown from 30,000 dead weightage tons. They call it DWT.
That's the capacity of the canal, eh?
The capacity of the canal to currently 240,000, which means a growth of 8 times.
Wow.
The capacity of the canal. Yeah?
From 30,000 to 240,000.
40 dead weight tonnage.
Wow.
But if you look at the shipping industry,
the
capacity of the ships has grown. In 1970, it was something like 20,000 TEUs, they call it. And currently it's 200,000 TEUs.
20,000 to 200,000.
200,000, which means the capacity of ships has grown by 10 times.
Right.
So the capacity of ships is growing at a much faster rate than the capacity of the canal can grow. And of course, the canal, to grow it takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of money because it's pretty much got to be widened and deepened.
Right.
Whereas the ship manufacturers, with engineering and technology, can keep building longer and longer and bigger ships very, very fast. So what happened in the Suez Canal was something that was I suppose we can say it was inevitable. It was going to happen.
Right.
And how are they going to mitigate this now? Are they going to widen the canal? Are they going, you see news about them maybe building a second canal on the other side of the Red Sea. I mean, we'll see what happens. So then when this whole Archegos fiasco maybe blew up on Friday last week, and then of course it hit the news on Monday with a few banks reporting that they were going to suffer losses. You sort of can inevitably draw the parallels about again how the financial system is evolving so fast that regulators are having a big challenge keeping up.
Right.
And this whole development of this shadow banking system actually is growing at again, if you look at numbers, this family office, I think we'll come to what exactly a family office is.
Okay.
The size of this family office is reportedly close to $6 trillion worth of assets.
Okay.
Now, what does 6 trillion mean? If you look at the size of the US economy, the US economy is actually $21 trillion. So this family office assets are close to 30% of the US economy.
My goodness.
And then if you look at our own economy in Malaysia, our economy is $380 billion worth. So this family assets, family office punya assets can actually buy the Malaysian economy 15 times.
My goodness. Wow.
And yet this family office system is pretty much unregulated. So that's the start of how this whole thing broke.
Right. So that's the context. So we understand the size of the issues that we are actually looking at. So let's go a bit into the Archegos chaos itself. So maybe you could share with our audience in a very simplified manner. Who are the parties and what actually happened? So let's start with Archegos. So Archegos is a family office.
It's a family office. Okay, what's a family office? Let's maybe we just go back a bit and start there.
Okay.
Those days, family offices basically is families with money.
Okay.
You set up your own investment office. So I can remember back even in the late 90s, early 2000s and all that. In Singapore, this was a flourishing industry.
Okay.
People who had made money, they put aside. The family office would then invest in stocks, bonds, whatever commodities. Or whatever.
So you'll have basically a professional fund manager for the family.
Yes, for the family.
Okay.
What has happened of late is that a lot of these big super duper hedge fund owners.
Okay.
And here we're talking about the likes of George Soros, Bill Hwang himself from Tiger Fund, the hedge fund. Carl Icahn, John Paulson, and so on and so forth. For the lack of a better term, to avoid regulation and the scrutiny that a hedge fund would have because they manage other people's funds, they basically cashed out and set up their own family office.
Interesting. So let me just interject. Before this hedge fund were not as regulated as it is now. So as hedge funds regulation is increasing, they are finding other avenues to go to an unregulated area.
Yes. One regulation. Secondly, of course, in hedge fund, you're answerable to your funders.
Right.
The people who invest in you. So you've got to do quarterly report, performance report, blah blah blah, whatnot, and all that. Whereas they say, I'll just take all the money I made, the billions I made, and I'll manage it myself, and I don't have to report to anyone. So we've seen a proliferation of this family office business.
Okay.
And I think I looked at some statistics. In the last 3 years, the number of family offices has grown by about 40%.
Wow.
And as I mentioned earlier, currently total assets are reportedly to be about $6 trillion.
My goodness.
So I suppose it's fine and well when you are managing, if you have, let's say you have cash of 100,000, so you're putting a bit in Tenaga Nasional shares, you're putting a bit in fixed deposit, you're buying some Sukuk Prihatin, and so on. Well, that's fine and well. But what happened in this particular case is Bill Hwang and this fund, they started to leverage themselves up. So they went to prime brokers people like Goldman Sachs, Nomura, and so on and so forth, and so forth and so on. and started to basically borrow from them
Okay.
so that for each dollar they invest, they get leverage on it. So in his case, it's reported that his asset size are about 10 billion US dollars.
Okay.
His investments total 50 billion. The
Okay.
additional amount came from leverage.
Right.
And unlike the traditional, I borrow money from a bank, and then I go and buy shares. I think some of the shares mentioned are like Viacom, for example.
Right.
I go and buy Viacom shares. What the thing about these guys is they want to try to move under the radar in the market so that it doesn't tip off other people. So if he himself had bought Viacom shares, it would be registered. It would be public knowledge to say, oh, I know so and so has bought so much Viacom shares.
Okay.
And people will start saying, hey, this guy's making a move, or this guy's taking over, or blah blah blah.
Right. Okay.
So what they arranged with these bankers was through swap mechanisms. So the bank,
his name does not appear directly.
Only the bank's name appears.
Right.
So far we've seen 3 banks surface: Credit Suisse, we've seen Nomura, and I think this morning I saw Mitsubishi and MUFG apparently also has exposure. And I guarantee you there'll be more. So coming out. And what these banks did was they bought on his behalf these shares or these assets, and through a swap transferred to him the risk of these underlying assets.
Okay.
But they retained assets in their name. So in the register of shareholders would be these banks.
Banks, okay.
And he hid behind it. So all was fine and well until about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
When I think if you take the example of Viacom decided that they were going to do a rights issue or something like that.
Right.
Because the price had risen so much, the issue didn't go well. And investors started to sell the shares. Okay. So now the fund manager of
if I may, Mr. Iqbal,
sorry,
I was just taking a walk with my my boss, just discussing this issue briefly. I said, okay, Viacom, who's Viacom? Because we have Paramount, we are subscribed to Paramount. Paramount, they basically own, Viacom is the owner of Paramount. It's like, okay. So it seems that the price grew, Viacom's price grew from like about $40 to up to $100 before the right issuance.
I thought $10.
$10, okay, even though. Maybe, yes, you're right. From $10 up to $100, and then when they did the right issuance, basically the market says, do we actually need this much shares of Viacom? So the price went down. Or
the market is saying, we don't believe you're valued so much.
Okay.
No, but this brings another point, another interesting point, because of the rallies we've seen in the markets, which have far outstripped fundamentals. Nothing lasts forever.
Correct.
So it gets to a point where people look at it and say, is this really worth the money that I'm putting inside? And so this is an example. And so as the price of the shares started to fall, the banks who held these shares on his behalf, of course, made margin calls. And very quickly, he ran out of money to be able to service these margins. And so the banks...
Sorry, if I may, okay. Can we just briefly explain how does a margin call work?
Okay, margin call basically is that let's say I hold Tenaga Nasional share.
Okay.
I can't remember the price. Let's say it's 10 ringgit. Now I bought that 10 ringgit Tenaga share by borrowing money from you. You are a bank.
Okay.
But you don't lend me 10 ringgit. You lend me 7 ringgit. I put in my money 3 ringgit.
Okay.
And you have fixed for me a margin that if the share price of Tenaga drops, you have to top up to make sure that our margin 70-30 remains constant.
Okay.
So if the value of the share drops to 9, 8, 7, you have to increase your cash
more
portion.
Equity. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
So what the banks do is then they call the margin call. They call on this margin. So you keep putting cash in, but if you run out of cash, then the bank has no choice. They take the share and they will sell it to raise cash to cover their position. So very suddenly, the floor fell out from the whole scheme.
Oh my goodness!
Correct. Now,
that drove the price even further down.
So yes, so then now you have the bank selling and so on and so forth.
And the margin call keep on increasing.
on the margin calls. And then, of course, on Monday, when it evolved that, the names of the banks started coming out, the investors in those banks started dumping those shares because at this point of time, nobody really knows what the level of damage and what the level of
The exposure is.
Of course, today is already Wednesday, things have come down and people are sort of getting a grip. But with investors, the first thing is sell first, ask later.
You want to get out as quickly as possible.
You want to get out as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So to come back to this whole family office issue, basically. So what these guys have been doing is, again, forget about the hedge funds, forget about all the regulatory oversight, the reporting I have to do, the headaches I have and all that. I take my money out, I set up my own family office. I can invest in anything I want. The challenge is, if you look at the US regulation, if it's a single owned family fund, that means in the case of Bill Huang, for example, he's the only owner of it.
Okay.
He doesn't even have to report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So this is a regulatory loophole. And yet, as we have pointed out, the size in aggregate of these family offices now is 30% of the US economy.
Wow.
Unregulated.
My goodness. And when there's a chaos like this, it's going to have a trickle effect on everything else.
Well, I can guarantee you last weekend, all the big banks and the prime brokers, risk management departments would have been staying back in office, going through everything they have in the books, all the exposure, checking what the mark-to-market values are, and calling their customers and finding out exactly what leverage were in their books.
Oh my goodness.
So a lot of very tired risk management people, I'm sure.
Right.
Just like there were a lot of very tired excavator and
in Suez Canal,
towboat operators in the Suez Canal trying to finish.
I love that parallel. That's an amazing parallel. Oh my goodness. And Mr. Iqbal, you also highlighted something that happened in Malaysia in the 80s. Do you mind sharing that with our audience?